The final change is to code section 5-22I, which is the purchase control. Currently, the statutory requirement is that anything above 17,500 needs to be approved or cannot be approved without having a resolution passed, or the current bid threshold of the borough is 44,000, the QPA. The proposed ordinance is to reduce that threshold from 44 to 4,000, which is allowable by state law, but it would then require anything that's above the $4,000 bid threshold or the QPA thresholds for professional service contracts to be approved by resolution by the council that might arise in the town. And so this also addresses some of those issues and provides basically a procedure on how to go about things that arise that are not necessarily spelled out for in the statutes.
But the last one that we went through, that is not the case.
What do you mean the left? What do you mean
The
that?
17,000, the 17,500 and 44.
So so the statute puts the threshold at 17,500, but allows for the municipality to lower that threshold by passing a resolution.
Right.
Which is what the borough is
Right,
proposing to do.
Right, and there's a balance here of our administrator being, she was.
There is, because
balance of running the government, running the day-to-day operations and kind of handcuffing. I don't see what the issue, I've not encountered any issues relative to that. And you're trying to run the government on a day-to-day basis.
it also turns into an efficiency issue because $4,000 is much lower than 17,500 or 44,000. So before things are agreed to or done on a day-to-day basis, they would have to come before the council for anything above that amount. So 4,000 is the amount that the borough's proposed. And so it is kind of a balance of efficiency versus transparency and council approval.
Christina, do you know of any towns that are that low?
I personally don't. The state statute has, they've set a standard and a lot of towns decide to stick with that. Some lower it. It varies, but I don't personally know of anything that's 4,000.
Yeah.
And to be clear, that's professional services only, not other goods and services, correct?
Well, some goods and services fall under professional services, so it would really depend on what exactly we're looking at.
I know a challenge that I have perceived, and again, I personally could be flexible on that dollar amount, that threshold amount, but the real concept here that I was requesting a reduction in the bid threshold, and primarily for professional service contracts. So broadly speaking, hiring an engineer, hiring an auditor or other professional service, firm, is that once the council had hired one of these organizations, the council kind of lost sight of how much was being spent. A recent example that I'll just throw it out there, just to give the folks a sense for what I'm wrestling with. We have right now one professional services firm provided us a proposal. We had a resolution very clearly defining the dollars, very clearly defining the scope. The scope was $72,000 a year. I went through invoices and it was very clear by council resolution, anything above that scope, any additional services would be deemed out of scope and would require a change order. I shared with the mayor last week one particular example I looked at that I actually identified in a review of the bills list on January 25th. I followed up to say, what is going on here? Why was this what appeared to be an additional spend made? It looks to me like we spent over more than $36,000 above what we had agreed to. There were additional services that this vendor provided. So I'm not questioning the vendor. I did question how was this authorized? It didn't come before the council. It was over the bid threshold. And there may be a very valid explanation, but I've asked a couple of times in the past week I still don't have a response, so I don't know why those dollars were authorized, but it begged the question to me. We have the right to reduce our bid threshold, and personally, I like the idea as a steward of taxpayer dollars. I like the idea of the council reviewing spend in excess of a certain threshold, for the time being, call it $4,000. And we say, if we question that, if we say, why are we doing this? We don't think it's appropriate. Yes, it's inefficient in that we spent more time on something we wouldn't have before, but we have a chance to avoid that spend if it's not in the best interest of our public. So again, I'm not lobbying specifically for 4,000 versus 5 or 7, whatever. But I was lobbying for a lower threshold because I feel like we're not necessarily controlling the spend as efficiently and effectively as we can.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't agree with that because, our administrator, I think, does keep an eye on the dollars. I think that does operate within appropriate parameters. The example you're using, we know we had a significant issue around some of our financial services that were financial transactions over the last few years. So a lot of work's gone into that, and that's the service that was provided. We also had to pay, but we all knew that those analysis were being done. The BA kept below. We didn't know that we were doing financial analysis.
No, the first time I saw a payroll assessment was on January 25th on the bills list, and at that moment in time, I questioned it because it was something I had not.
But if I go back to last year, we said we had significant issues with payroll and paying people and the way we were paying people. So that analysis is what followed that concern that was raised. We've not, the BA has not gone over a threshold. The direction we gave her was to clean it up, fix it, and get it squared away, and we're almost there. But there's parts of what might seem to be not approved was a significant issue that was addressed by our financial services company, and again, we're almost to a point where we can start making those determinations. So,
well, as far as I can tell, Mr. Mayor, we knew there were payroll issues. The council was not approached to say, we have a contract for $72,000 that you approved, council. We want to spend another $36,000. Do you give us your approval again? We were not asked to give that additional approval. As I understand local public contracts law, anything over $44,000 should have come to the borough council. And this is one example I pulled off a bills list, made me realize the council loses sight of the spend once we hire the vendor. And I wanted to ensure that the council had more of an opportunity to review significant additional spend. Now, again, whether it's 4,000 or 6,000, I don't care. I want it to be a much lower threshold. And we're talking about 17.5, but honestly, the threshold has been 44,000 because our QPA is allowed to approve things over up to 44,000. So I'm suggesting we go not from 17.5 to 4, but I'm suggesting from at the current moment in time, 44,000.
no, there's a difference in 17.5 and 44. Those are two different thresholds, and again, the BA is operated within those thresholds. So there's nothing that the BA or myself or anybody in the administration has done that's violated those thresholds. I think part of what we've got here.
I'm sorry.
Finish.
Well, you just made a statement that I think is wrong. I mean, can you clarify?
Well,
Nothing has been done that violated those thresholds. I just stated it. I sent you an email a week ago. I still have not gotten a response.
that doesn't mean that something's been violated. So I wouldn't want you to make an assertion or assert something or make that kind of aspersion. It's not the case. You're basically saying that the BA is violated.
I asked the question and
And you will get an answer to that question. I think part of what's going on, which has been somewhat of a slippery slope since last May, is defining, what's the executive branch of a local government. You could take it at a federal level or at a local level, and what's the legislative. I believe that the administration's operated within those parameters. And this gray area, you know, where this leaching one way or the other has been a move, you know, stressing away from the executive into the legislative, whereas the legislative, yes, it's a check and a balance, but it's not a managerial function. And what I kind of see here is it's becoming a managerial function, and it shouldn't be. So that's my view. I'll leave it at that.
I would say, everything that Mr. Cannon and his firm has provided to us today is legally feasible. The firm would not provide this council with any guidance that was not legal, not appropriate. So we can all have somewhat differing opinions, but I think, and there have been many times where I've disagreed with Mr. Cannon's opinions on issues, but I think ultimately every member of this council has to ultimately respect the opinion he gives us. And in this case, everything that we're discussing today, he's had some challenges that members of this governing body have pushed back very aggressively at Mr. Cannon. I would say he's been under fire to make sure he gives us a very accurate representation of what he believes is the best legal response. And Ms. Melvin, I'm speaking for him only because he's not here, but really, I would ask you to offer any comment you could to clarify.
Yes, I mean, all of the suggestions or proposed amendments are legal. I think it's just more so of an efficiency balance that needs to be addressed, but that's, you know, that's all, you know, the mayor and council's decision.
Comments?
Yeah, comment. I think in the example given, you know, we all knew there were payroll problems from the past. We all knew it was going to take a lot of work to fix it, and we basically gave that direction to do that. But I agree that you know, once it crossed a certain amount, a dollar amount, it should have come back to the council and said, in order for us to address this, we're going over the size of this contract that we have with those CFO's company. So I mean, I agree that we should do it. In that example, it should have come back. You know, yes, we could argue about what is the number, but as he said, it is running the government efficiently or transparency. Like I like the idea of having more transparency. So this is something that you know, I'm willing to take a look at, give it a try.
I
Argue about the number.
I wouldn't use the word transparency, but that's just me.
Well, it says right in our attorney's memo that what we're doing is balancing efficiency of running the government with transparency. So if you have an issue with the word transparency, you can take it up with Greg because he wrote the memo. I guess Christina, you helped him write it. So, but that word's in the memo. So
Thanks.
My suggestion, as a QPA administrator, finance department, is if you were going to lower your threshold, 17.5 probably would be a good number, because that's the pay to play threshold where you have to acknowledge a professional. When you start lowering it to other levels, it's more difficult to track. It just puts another mechanism in for the finance department, administration, QPA to follow. And the number that was given was it was a difficult number. And then when you say your professionals, you really need to define what's a professional. I know that for the council, it might be one thing, but for an administrator or a department head, it's another. The state gives the thresholds because they go through, you know, we know what the cost of things are, and it has to do with your bidding threshold. So it all goes together. That was a lot. And I know you're probably trying to solve a different problem by implementing that, but I don't think that's probably the best route.
I think I am trying to solve what I think is a challenge, at least, but I said in the last meeting, I'll say again, I'm not locked into the $4,000 threshold that is in the preliminary draft, but I am thinking at that lower end. I wasn't thinking 17.5 either. If someone said 5,000 or 6,000 instead of 4.
So you have a quote threshold that is at this time 6,600, which I believe the state's actually looking to do an early increase because of inflation. So I mean, 6,600, I could see that being a number, because at that point, you're required to get quotes. We do it in-house, like, that's not something, that you guys would see, but, we have a mechanism in our, you can't even process something without an additional quote. The purchasing manual that you passed by resolution also says that we recommend 3 quotes, but 2 is okay for 6,600, so that might be a number you could work with as well. I do see, that's kind of low still, but especially if you have a department where they have that mechanism in their budget to get a professional in. Like, you might have the shade tree when they got the arborist in.
Mhm.
So then, like, that wouldn't have been able to been awarded without a resolution. So you just have to remember that sometimes you need a continuity factor, that some things have to happen. And, as long as you take that into consideration, I believe, or maybe there's just some type of communication that really needs to happen and not a change of your purchasing manual and your finance policy.
And those current amounts tied to the state
Yeah.
statutes,
Well, it's the state recommendation.
state recommendations, yeah, not statutes.
Yeah, and every 5 years they increase it, so you'd be bringing the numbers back to like the 80s. That number, when
Right,
it comes to functioning.
right. And part of the concern, at least that we're trying to wrestle with, is simply how much spend can take place without the council's awareness, because
17.5
QPA
with a certain vendor,
and
that's the
QPA
state,
can
yeah.
go up to 44,000, correct?
Yes, but at 17.5, you do a resolution of spend, so you're using that vendor. But remember, that's where your budget comes into play, because a department can't overspend their budget. So if that contract amount is within their budget, really, they should be able to spend if there is a project that they're doing.
All right, now this helps. Me
Because you
understand.
can't, that's why it's so important within the budget to look at the prior spend, the prior year spend, and see what those numbers are. Department heads are usually asked, what is their spend? Like, I knew I had to do a payroll assessment, so I knew that the spend was going to be minimum this amount, but could go up to a certain amount, so it was in the budget. And a paid play was spent. So, yeah. That's different ways of looking at it, and I think communication is probably key.
Ordinance 2023-4, ordinance amending certain portions of chapter 5 administrative government of the borough is revised during ordinances modifying and clarify certain meeting rules, agenda guidelines, appointment powers, and purchasing procedure. Are there any council comments on this introduction?
I don't have this in my packet, so I know there was some discussion of, where there was a late breaking request by the mayor to not use it, but I don't have that. I mean, I don't need it. I'm familiar enough with it, but just saying I don't have it in my packet here. Anyway. I'll let you.
Our attorneys, Mr. Cannon actually sent the documents to the council, so the council has a jump at 9 in the packet. And there was a discussion with the mayor to hold off on including it in the packet until the mayor and Mr. Cannon had a chance to discuss some of the questions that the mayor had. So that's why the delay in distributing. Any other comments? Okay, so I'll make the motion that we introduce.
I do have some
Okay.
comments. I was waiting to see if anyone else did. I think in the conversation I had with the counselor and I sent out a note to the council today with some summary notes that I had on the ordinance change. There's parts of that ordinance that really don't make a lot of sense, and I think there needs to be some work done on that. There's some agenda related items that have been clarified, which is fine. And then I think the movement of, or moving a bunch of positions into this whole idea of advice and consent, I think is really shifting the intent of our form of government. I've said that before, I'll say it again. I think we're changing the tenor of we're attempting to change the tenor of something that is our charter. I think it needs a lot more discussion, and but it's been brought forward for introduction, so be it. Anyone else?
I mean, I would just say that, I think there's been a lot of discussion, both in front of the public. We've had 2 workshops. I know Mr. Cannon has been challenged, or at least questioned, about the legality of these amendments in a couple of council meetings from the public. He's also defended the position that is represented in this ordinance introduction language to other attorneys. So no one's ever going to agree, no matter what the issue is, including the size of sheds. But at least for something as complicated as this, it's my personal belief is it's been vetted substantially. In fact, when I personally asked to put this on the agenda a week ago, I did say to the mayor, please, the reason you all did not get this document, the details, is because the mayor was raising questions. And I did say, if you and Mr. Cannon agree that there are ambiguities, if you and Mr. Cannon agree there are inconsistencies, changes we should make, I will be the first person to motion to withdraw this this particular introduction. So far as I'm aware, Mr. Cannon and the mayor have not agreed on any of the concerns the mayor's raised. So everything we've been through as a council suggests that the introduction that we're making, the ordinance changes that we're requesting, fall within this form of government. We're not changing this form of government and are legal. So I just wanted to make that comment, Mr. Mayor, just to make sure people understand.
I think Article 1, Section I, 1 and 2, I think Mr. Cannon and I agreed that there was some problems with it and it needed to be figured out. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, we talked about it. I think those sections are superfluous. I mean, they don't really add anything to the section. I mean, that's a new change that wasn't in there to begin with, obviously. Well, and the rest of it, you guys are eminently familiar with what the real dispute is here. I'll just leave it at that. But what the mayor cited is true. I think it's superfluous. It doesn't really make a lot of sense in light of how we do this here. So we want to add that to it.
Can you share with everyone what the nature of?
Sure, it goes through that particular section goes through the, you know what, let me just open it up and read it to you, so it's easy. Well, I gotta figure out which version. Hold on. All right. So it's titled Nominations and Appointments. It says nominations submitted by the mayor will be considered at the work session meetings of the Borough Council and may be confirmed by council resolution at the next regular meeting. The alternative, mayoral nominations may be acted upon at the next regular meeting thereafter, the timing of which is the sole discretion of the mayor. That doesn't really mean much in general. You do it this meeting, you can do it the next meeting. We'll tell you when we'll do it, right?
Well, and there's no reference point as to what you're trying to.
There's no reference point as to what nominations we're even talking about, really.
Yeah.
I assume that this was inserted at some point when there was a procedural argument, much like the one we're having now, where this fixed a problem at some point in history that just doesn't really exist anymore. Then it's section 2, without belaboring the point, is With respect to appointments to be made by the Borough Council, any member of the council may nominate as many candidates as there are offices to be filled. And it goes through a discussion of how there'll be a committee of the whole meeting, which we don't have. And then we'll report to a regular meeting of the council. And then you consider the nominees in alphabetical order. Fundamentally, things that just aren't applicable to the way we've been doing things here, at least as long as I've been here. And the number one doesn't really say anything. So the mayor and I discussed those. I think that was the top of his list of the things he sent out. And I can't disagree that they're superfluous to the operations here.
Because you're saying those are part of the existing
Yes.
ordinance.
Yeah, those are part of the existing ordinance. There was no changes to those sections in the current ordinance.
Okay. And we haven't run into problems because of that language that's superfluous or.
Not run into problems because of that particular language. No.
Okay.
And nor are we suggesting changes to that language, right? So.
Well, something needs to change because it's a bridge to nowhere is what it is. It really doesn't have a reference point. It doesn't have good definitions. And I would argue that if you look at section 2 and 3 changes, it's very clear in 514 that there's 6 direct departments.
through the company.
Yeah, okay.
So, okay,
Thank you.
good.
The goal is typically to try to make as comprehensive changes once, so you don't have to keep adding as you go.
Perfect, thank you.
This being an imperfect world, though, we tend to revisit every year or so and tweak here and there depending. This is a particularly complicated and I would say very important ordinance for the borough and for how we, the governing body, govern ourselves, follow procedures and so forth. So I can't underscore enough, there has been a tremendous amount of time invested in this, largely by our attorney, Mr. Cannon. Again, we've had 2 workshops on this and we've had many internal discussions, so enough said on that, but I just want to make sure anyone else has any questions. Okay, well then, I'd like to make a motion that we introduce ordinance 2023-4. An ordinance amending certain portions of chapter 5, administration of government, of the borough's revised general ordinances to modify and clarify certain meeting rules, agenda guidelines, appointment powers, and purchasing procedures.
Second,
Councilwoman DeNoble,
Yes.
Council President DeMarco,
So just to explain my vote, there are elements of ordinance 2023-4 that address some concerns that I do share with my council colleagues. However, I cannot support this ordinance as introduced tonight. Just my belief, I am hesitant to support any ordinance that conflicts with state statutes, has the potential to put undue constraints on our municipal staff, and could be done through administrative policy rather than by ordinance. In Bradley Beach, we have separate elections for mayor and for council, with each office having different distinct responsibilities. The ordinance as being introduced transfers some of those powers held by the office of the mayor to the council. And in my heart, I just do not believe the community of Bradley Beach elected me as a councilwoman to hold those powers. But the important takeaway here is not that we don't unanimously agree as a council. It's how my council colleagues and I disagreed, which was through respectful and civil ongoing conversations and an exchange of ideas. So with respect to my council colleagues, my vote is no.
Councilman Gubatose,
I vote yes.
Councilman Weber,
yes,
Mayor Fox.
I vote no. I stated my reasons before. I think we're, I think some of the elements of this relative to agenda and the organization of meetings makes sense. I think the rest, is shifting powers around. I don't think it's productive, so I would vote no.